Hey everyone, just Sam here. Just wanted to give you a little video inclusion in this installment that I think is going to be helpful. So this one's going to be pretty brief, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of this politics, Christianity, church state dichotomy, um, and something in the Bible that people might use to say that Christians um, shouldn't talk about anything. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that it's every person's job to involve themselves in politics. I don't even think that's really my job, but I do speak my mind. I'm just being myself and sharing things that I've learned throughout this journey of research and investigation throughout the last couple of years. So that's why I'm doing these videos. It's not to demonize anybody who disagrees with me, but it's just to try to show some insight into like the things that I think might be causing problems in the world and might be coming up against the church, the powers of the state. And when I say powers of the state, I'm not just talking about the Biden administration, right? I'm talking about other things too that are, they might be cultural influences that are being used and working hand in hand with the state. So, anyways, people might read this section in the Bible, which is in Second John, uh, as the second epistle of John, as something to silence us if we're saying political things, and especially if they're kind of brash and they're politically incorrect. Um, that that we shouldn't be, saying those things. And so let me just say the verse here. It's Second John, um, verse 9. Anyone who runs ahead, verse 9, part A. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have a God. So it kind of just crossed my mind as I was reading it this morning that somebody might say, oh, you're running ahead and getting involved in politics. Like, that's not the teaching of Christ because you're not actually talking about the gospel. But anybody who knows me knows that I do share Christ and I do teach about Christ. Um, I don't consider myself a teacher, but I do try to tell people about Jesus all the time. Um, so anyways, I could see how that could be why I did this video is that I could see how that could be interpreted as like anybody who runs ahead, and kind of like involves themselves in the matters of the world, maybe criticizes the party in power. They're not focused on Jesus. They're focusing on the things of this world, and therefore, that's not a correct teaching. That's not the teaching of Christ. Um, but we got to remember that Christ even made political comments. He referred to Herod as a reed blown around by the wind. He referred to the political leaders of of Judaism at that time, and he would call out things that they were doing that were hypocritical, their abuse of their position and their power. So, not saying that Jesus was political in the sense that we have come to understand that term in the 21st century. But if you put this verse in context here, let me just read a little bit from before, from verse 7 to um, verse 10. Many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what you have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take him into your house or welcome him. Anyone who welcomes him shares in his wicked work. So is that saying like anybody who talks about what's going on in the world, and warns people about what's going on in the world, you shouldn't welcome them into your home? No, what it's talking about is people who have abandoned the elementary teachings of Jesus, who have abandoned the notion that Jesus came as a human being in the flesh. Jesus is the Christ. That spirit is the Antichrist. So I think that's more talking about I know Gnosticism. I'm pretty sure Gnosticism didn't come until the 2nd or 3rd centuries AD. But what John is saying is that people were already going out into the world, and they were not saying that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh. People were going out into the world and they were deceiving people with an idea of like kind of a secret knowledge that, hey, we know what Christians are saying, but what we're saying is the actual more comprehensive knowledge of Christian thought. So that reminds us of Gnosticism that came later. And it does remind us of the Christ consciousness phenomenon that we see now, where people say, oh, I know Christ. I am a practitioner of Christ consciousness. So these people who are teaching these things, and this is largely coming into the church. This is what John is addressing. People who have abandoned the gospel for their own interpretations of God, and making up a God who is a figment of their imagination, so that they can lots of times do it for positions of power. A lot of people in the church will kind of preach this name it and claim it gospel because they know that it's going to lead them to a position of great influence and great power. So that's what I wanted to say. And I just wanted to make a side note at the end here, is that some people say, why did you say that on Instagram? Or why did you make that video and say that in your video about, the party that I belong to, the Democratic Party maybe? Or why are you talking about Marxism like this? It seems unloving to people who are Marxists. Well, let me ask you. You grew up in an America where you had basic freedoms. You had the freedom of speech. You had the Second Amendment, the right to defend yourself. You have all these basic freedoms that are protected under the foundational laws of our nation. And these laws are what led to our nation having the religious freedom that it has. Now these laws are coming under very real threat today. So let me just ask you about your kid. Wouldn't it be loving for somebody who has the next generation in mind, who wants their children to grow up in the same country that we grew up in? Obviously, change the things that are bad, but we want them to have basic rights and freedoms. We want them to have the right to practice their religion without fear, without intimidation, without having to go underground, without their freedom of speech being censored and silenced. I want that for your children, for your grandchildren. And that's why I'm talking. Because the Founding Fathers recognized that too. Freedom, the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. And that's true. Because now we see people aren't watching anymore. They aren't paying attention anymore. And they're ready to give up their rights. They're willing to give up their rights to the government because they're they're not worried about it. They have so much other stuff going on. They're not worried about rights, right? And what this government entity is really mastered. And I'm not saying it's just the government party. I think the Republican or the Democratic Party, I think the Republican Party has problems too, but I do see that we see the predominant push towards power coming from the left, right? So what I think that they're doing is that they're creating an elasticity. They're not forcing everything on us right now yet, because when they see people start to speak out, they retreat, they pull back, and they say, look, no, we're not doing that. You're crazy. So when they push and push and push until people finally say, hey, no, we're not doing this, then they can pull back, and then they say, like, hey, what were you all afraid of? We weren't doing anything. And then as soon as people become unaware and they let their guard down, that's when they come back, right? So it's, like I said, creating an elasticity with the population, an ideological elasticity, and that is what I'm talking about when I talk about social conditioning. in martial arts, when you condition your body for, you know, being able to take a beating, you don't just beat the crap out of yourself. You hit yourself little by little by little, and then you get tougher and tougher and tougher. So in the same way, through ideology, they push a little by little until we become more and more desensitized. So that's what I'm talking about here, and I want people to understand that, you know, if we consider that our next door neighbors are the biggest threat to us because they think differently than us, and that the biggest threat right now isn't the unilateral power and the threat to our basic freedoms that are protected under the U.S. Constitution, they have been tricked into believing that. They've been duped by the powers of the state, right? And so that is the basic framework of what's happening. And this is going to get more and more out of control unless we stand up for our faith, stand up for the truth, and preach Jesus. So, but also be aware of what's going on in the world, right? So it's not in this section in 2 John, it's not talking about, hey, if you do your own research, if you start becoming outspoken as a Christian or as a conservative, you are a false teacher, and Christians are not to let you into their home. That is a misreading of this text. What this is talking about is people who rejected the basic doctrine of Christianity, who rejected that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, who were preaching a secret knowledge that's much more akin to the New Age movement coming into the church today. So I'm sorry if that doesn't really jive well with you, but that's the truth. That's what John was talking about. But anyways, I'm going to cut it off here. Like, subscribe, and share if you find this video to be helpful. And remember, always we're putting Christ first, and we want our children to grow up in a country where they have religious freedoms. They have the right to express themselves. And that's what I want for you, and that's why I'm saying the things that I'm saying. But God bless you, and take care.